socioeconomic factors, socio-political factors, they would always bear down to the minimum of being isolated, being vulnerable, and not being given the education and the support from your school, your parents, your masjid, whatever it might be, in terms of tackling those hateful narratives that come, from my own experience, those people that use the Quran and the Hadith to spread violence and hate.
How radical kids can become just because of the content that is there online. And now Facebook will not be fact-checking many things. It seems absurd.
We saw that in the 1st January this year when accident in New Orleans, the attack, and Donald Trump right away went on X and blamed immigrants. And then the news said that actually it was American, he was in the Marines, and he didn't retract that. He just kept blaming immigrants.
In my country, being a woman itself is a crime.
In my country, it is illegal for a woman's voice to be heard in the street.
In my country, my creative freedom can cost me my blood.
I have a refugee protection, but I'm invisible.
I have a refugee protection, but freedom is not free. You have to buy it.
I don't even have a country. Try being an activist when you're stateless.
I have refugee status, but without NGOs like ReFOCUS, I wouldn't have any support.
I am a recognized refugee in Europe, but I'm still being stopped at airports for holding a refugee travel document.
In ReFOCUS, I can be myself, an artist, in a safe place.
In ReFOCUS, I can be brave in my art and reconnect with activism.
In ReFOCUS, I can create media and teach others.
I stayed here because of ReFOCUS. I bet on ReFOCUS because there is no creative borders here.
Our community wants to say thank you to everyone who has been so generous with their support, but we still need your help to ensure our community continues. You can help change someone's life just like ours by donating today.
And we're back with Fractured. Wonderful to have everybody back with us, especially that I'm so excited about our guests today. I even knocked my mic almost. Amir Khazir, welcome very much to Fractured. We are so happy that you agreed to speak to us today because the topic can be very uplifting. We're probably not going to speak only about positive things, but I'm very happy you are with us, a founder and a CEO of Media Cultured. And what you do, in a nutshell, in media culture, through different media productions, through workshops, you challenge extreme narratives. And this is so, so, so important. So I knew from the moment we spoke the first time that we will invite you to the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Sonia. It's a pleasure to be here and to join ReFOCUS today.
Amjid, let's go straight to what you as Media Cultured do exactly. How did it come to life in your head, your co-workers? What is the main idea behind it?
Yeah, so we're based in the UK. We are essentially an education and training social enterprise. But our raison d'etre is to tackle all forms of hate, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and racism. So as much as we deliver frontline workshops, education and training programs, a lot of that is built around film, sport, culture, because to tackle the narratives of hate and division, I think bringing people together is essentially incredibly important to us. I was born and raised in the UK, and the reason I chose to set up this organization 12 years ago, I sadly lost my uncle Zubair post what was an alleged racist assault. And so that was the key moment where we decided to try and fashion a way to do more, But obviously, having been born and raised in the UK, I have experienced racism, being of Pakistani heritage. And also post September 11th, there was a huge rise in anti-Muslim hate. So it just felt like my life's journey brought me to do what I do. And my passions and convictions are now demonstrated and carried out through this organization, Media Cultured, in the UK.
What you do is very important for people in the UK and especially the young people. I was watching this documentary on YouTube. It's called, I think, 4chan versus ISIS. So 4chan is a hackers group. They some of them were working with Anonymous, the hacker group Anonymous. So and they were attacking ISIS online. So they were taking down their accounts everywhere in social media, and they mentioned that ISIS was targeting mainly young people and mainly teenagers.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah, because they are the center of radicalization narratives. And I want to ask you what strategies, and you have experience in this, what strategies work best in engaging young people in a positive way using media?
Yeah, it's a really important question because before we actually began with Media Cultured in 2011-12, the 5 or 10 years previous to that, we'd had the opportunity to work with local mosques and with youth groups to look at the dangers of social media in terms of the content coming out of the Iraq war. There was, really awful beheading videos from the likes of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, who were then led by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. And so one of our key focuses was what role can tech play and social media play in driving hateful narratives, be that beheading videos or be that, just your standard racist diatribes that you find right across social media now. And what we've seen in the last 10 and 12 years is a huge drive by all forms of extremists to use social media, to use various apps around gaming like Discord, like Telegram, to the point where some of these groups have even chosen to create their own computer games. It's incredible, especially during COVID. So these are obviously targeted towards young people, a younger generation, where there's access, there's availability, there's a demand. So these young people, wherever they might be, whether it's ISIS or the far right, who have gone very, very good at evading authorities by finding different mediums to engage young people, it's incredibly important that we provide a counter narrative. It's incredibly important that not only do we see there's a risk of people being radicalized, especially young people, boys and girls, online, through gaming platforms, through tech platforms, but that we have a means of addressing these questions that they might have, that we are educating teachers about the dangers. We've spoken to hundreds of staff and teachers that we've trained, and sadly, some of them don't even know what red pilling means, don't know what incel is. So we're starting on this sort of, difficult ground where we're speaking about the terminology, we're speaking about the technology, and then we're speaking about the education and training that we need to give to teachers and then to young people about these hateful ideologies. And wherever they might be fashioned, in your home or online, they can be defeated. It's about giving people the encouragement, the education, and the information to tackle those narratives. And that's, I think, one of the things that keeps us quite unique is that we're always looking to work with young people and bring young people into the fold to help us understand the challenges and the content that they're watching, so then we can address it together.
Mm-hmm. Amjid, what are the trends currently in radicalizing young people? I mean, first of all, are you observing that it's growing or maybe declining? And the second part of the question would be, so what would be those factors? You already mentioned a little bit about social media. Also, Rasheed mentioned how it was presented, how young people were targeted by ISIS. So what are those main factors that make young people prone to radicalization?
Well, essentially, the main factors that we would say, the socioeconomic factors, socio-political factors, they would always bear down to the minimum of being isolated, being vulnerable, and not being given the education and the support from your school, your parents, your masjid, whatever it might be, in terms of tackling those hateful narratives that come, from my own experience, those people that use the Quran and the Hadith to spread violence and hate. There's nothing that would justify acts of violence in the Quran and the Hadith is the likes of what ISIS might be using. So how do we work with these stakeholders to give them the support they need to work with the communities? But those isolations and those vulnerabilities, they're mirrored on the far right. If we look at the situation around the world where more and more populism is rising, we've just come off the inauguration of Donald Trump in America, and there's a huge conversation in America right now about where are young people getting that information? Well, it is on TikTok, it is on social media. They are going away from mainstream media, and what that's created is this unmanaged, undemocratic form of content where people are buying into one narrative, choosing sides, and then it's very hard to pull them away. So the trends, Sonia, are very similar on both sides. As people get into this tunnel vision, they believe what they believe, the archetypal rabbit hole, as it were. And then what we're finding is that they're becoming more polarized here and abroad. They're buying their narratives, whether it was in the UK, where we've got post the awful incident around Southport, where 3 young girls were killed. Instantly online, we had key figures spreading the idea that the attacker was a Muslim and an asylum seeker. He was none of the above. But whether it was COVID, whether it was Brexit, mainstream media has lost that ability to engage with a certain demographic, and that content and that voice that they're hearing consistently and buying into, and then the algorithm is feeding them even more. It's found on social media, it's found on TikTok, it's found on Reddit, on Redchan, 4chan. So I think if we're not going to be aware of the fact that the modern way of buying, taking information really needs to be addressed, then we're going to struggle. Because when I was a child, we were told, don't believe everything you read, i.e. in the newspapers. We now live in an era where the access to mass information and then thus misinformation and disinformation, there's never been a time like this in human history. Never. So there's a huge challenge to find these trends, tackle these trends wherever they might be. And that's why it's important that we use film and sport and gaming, that we use the same platforms to counter those hateful messages. And I think the work you do at ReFOCUS, the kind of work that we talked about in terms of filmmaking and education is incredibly important to creating an alternative narrative that also people can buy into.
Just a comment, if I may, like in the context of what you just said, the fact that Facebook just decided to cut all the fact-checking on the American side. We cannot do it on the European side yet, at least yet. I mean, the policy is pretty strong when it comes to different data protection laws, at least in the EU. But in the context of everything you just said, how radical kids can become just because of the content that is there online, and now Facebook will not be fact-checking many things. It seems absurd.
They were not doing a good job even before.
They were not doing a great job before, and they already apologized, and there were those accusations that they knew about certain things. They never stopped them. Teenagers committing suicides because of horrible comments about their looks, even appearance, right? And now they will not be fighting those informations anyhow.
No, I couldn't agree more with it. I was nodding along as Rasheed spoke, because even in the past, because we work quite closely with the likes of the Premier League and football clubs right across the UK, and there's been a huge push for social media companies to do more to tackle direct messages full of racism or post. We had Jadon Sancho, Marcus Rashford, and Bukayo Saka miss penalties in the Euro final against Italy. And there was a huge amount of racism that was pushed in their direction. And there was this assumption in the UK that, this must have come from overseas. And then the statistics showed that over 70% of it or 60% of it actually came from accounts registered in the UK. And so we have those laws in place. But as Rasheed said, the number of times I've used social media reporting mechanisms to say, well, this is a hate comment, and it's just been ignored. It's been literally I've been told, people are using the N-word repeatedly and being reported, and there wasn't much done. But I do share your concern, Sonia, that if these safeguards and mechanisms are completely removed, and we've seen where the world is going, as we've just discussed in the previous answer, with unchecked information, if that is only amplified in the next few years, then where are we going to be? Quite literally, people believe the stuff that comes out online, and if it needs to be tackled. And I don't think, there's a very good book. I can't remember the name of the author, but it's called The Science of Hate. It's something that is very well worth reading. Matthew, I think his name is a professor in Cardiff University, and he talks about the number of mechanisms that people have tried to use to tackle online hate, and it's not as easy as just banning account, changing the algorithm. It's not that simple. And so I think the onus falls on the wider community, on parents, on educators, creatives, so that we have a powerful, visceral, strong alternative narrative that's consistently out there, so people aren't just looking at us as, oh, well, it's not nice to be a racist. They really believe that. They really have to believe it. And I don't think we speak to the beauty of diversity, the strength of immigration enough. I don't think we do. I think it's consistently bad news, and there's much, much more we can do to tackle, whether it's online or in your home or in your school, the kind of ideologies that are dividing our communities.
I actually agree with you. I really think we miss those positive stories and not just like small fake things, because when I have to be honest, like what we are doing here is also we're trying to fight certain stereotypes and fight for a different narration, but we discuss problems, right? We actually recently have not brought many of those like really positive stories that are happening. It's something that we would also have to change or think more about, like those regular positive stories, also because all research show that the best integration happens naturally through, for example, workplaces, right? It's not something that is forced. It doesn't happen at some fancy trainings that you're supposed to do. You are supposed to start appreciating this diversity in your natural environment. Only then it becomes your easy and natural way of thinking.
Yeah. Amjid, you mentioned... Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
No, after you.
Go. This is a different thing, so if you want to comment, go.
Well, on that point, Sonia, see, we do a lot of inclusion and diversity and social unity training, and there are challenges that immigration brings to different countries, because one of the things that really sort of gets me sort of annoyed is when people say in diversity training, we are all the same. We're not.
Yeah.
We are human beings, but we have very, very distinct cultures and beliefs and, morals and values. Some people believe one thing, some people believe another. Diversity, the beauty of diversity is accepting the differences. The challenge is the cultural intelligence. So if I, as a Muslim man, am advised that shaking hands with a woman who is not my wife, my daughter, or touching her in any way as my wife, daughter, or mother is forbidden to me, or it's recommended I don't, and I can educate my colleague or my school friend that this is done out of a sense of respect, a sense of safeguarding, so we don't have shaking hands, or in some cultures kissing on one cheek, or in some cultures kissing on two cheeks when you meet. That's simply, I have utmost respect and honor for you as a person, but I don't shake hands. It's very similar in some Jewish traditions. It's very, very similar in Japan. If you meet somebody who's older than you, I think it's considered rude to put your hand out first to shake hands.
Wow.
So just little bits of cultural intelligence that go such a long way, which some people, they don't shake hands with women. Oh my God, look at these backward Muslims. No, it's actually done for safeguarding, because we feel as a faith and as a community, there's certain safeguards put in place so you don't end up at the Me Too movement where people just go, you can do what you want. No. But I understand. I was born and raised in England. In England, shaking hands is the normal thing to do. It's part of the culture. So I've adapted, and it's about learning and cultural intelligence, and some things you will like and some things you won't. But that's fine, because we are not all the same. So I think it's important that we address those diversity education training in a more nuanced way.
I need to comment because I went to one of the training. It was not sensitivity training, but it had this part of it. And they showed us this, I think it's pretty famous right now, this meme when obviously European woman in a swimming suit is looking at a Muslim woman, a woman in burqa, and they're just like looking at each other and how they cannot understand each other. So the European woman is looking, is like, oh, poor her, men force her to wear this whole hijab, burqa and everything. And the Muslim woman is like, poor her. Her husband and her father do not take care of her and do not provide for her, right? So the understanding is not there unless we really have some kind of an openness to explaining this and be open to this diversity.
I think we should embrace it and just because I hear also people say, I don't see color. I mean, what do you mean? No, I mean, I'm brown, I see color, you're white. I mean, but doesn't mean we don't have to.
You're brown?
Yes, I'm brown. You don't think so we just have to, I mean, put it there on the table and talk about it. So if you have questions, I remember I was in the bus, I remember, and I was holding that thing. I don't know how they call it in the bus. The pole. Yeah, and then there was this Greek white boy. He was looking at my hand. And he was just looking at it. And then my friend was with me. He talked to his mom and she told him he had never seen a brown person before. He was coming from the village. And we talked to him and he was a little bit scared, but we were not like, hey, you racist motherfucker. No, we just say, hey,
we talk. A boy.
So we need, I think, to talk. And if you have questions about my culture, it's better to tell them to me, even if it's a joke, just say it in my face rather than go run with it and build something else. And then you come attack me with it. And then now I'm defending myself. It's not as if we are in a civilized conversation and we're just talking about it and even making fun of it, because these stereotypes sometimes are really good material for fun. But when we do it all together and everyone of course agrees that
I would be very careful with the making fun part, because you're very tolerant when it comes to this as a stand-up comedian. I don't know if I told you, Amjid, but Rasheed is a stand-up comedian.
I have a pass,
So you make a lot of jokes about race and how you are being viewed and what happened
to you. But I always start with myself. So
yes, you always do.
So I don't just.
But like this is, you know, like you mentioned certain behaviors before that you would not start talking to Greek girls in an elevator here because of the color of your skin, which I couldn't like really understand. But for me, it's like I would never make a joke about somebody's color of the skin, because like for me it's like obvious an accusation of racism, right? Even I can make it to you, right? Like because we know each other, we're friends, and that's a pretty normal life in the studio. But with anybody else, I definitely would not. Even like with my friends that have like Indian origins, it's very sensitive.
Yeah, it should stay in the the zone of we are making fun when everybody's doing it, not when someone is like, hey, so they should keep them away. Amjid, you mentioned football and what happened to Rashford and Saka in the World Cup. And I remember, I don't know if you remember this, in 2006, France played against Italy, and Zinedine Zidane, he's Algerian origins, but he's French. So he hit this player, Materazzi, and then the media was attacking him, this Algerian guy, and then he went out and said, when I'm playing good, I'm French, but when I get a red card, I'm Algerian. And it's just... for me, like something very beautiful, like football, and I really love football. And I wanted to ask you which Premier League club you I think Liverpool, right?
The greatest team in the world, Liverpool.
Really?
That's how you.
I knew it.
Oh,
I don't know why,
but reaction
but I don't
behind
know.
the scenes here.
That's how you. When you say Liverpool, you have to have the full greatest team.
You
the
never
world
walk
has ever
alone.
seen.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to tell you, I like Manchester City just because of Guardiola. If he leaves, I'm leaving with him. So I don't like football clubs. I like coaches because they have philosophy. And you had the chance to present to the Premier League and do some presentations to them and explain to them your work. I want to ask you, how was your experience and what this popular sports can add to this positive change?
Oh, it's such an important question. And if you allow me just slightly to go back a little bit, because when we talked about diversity and cultural intelligence, we should also take into account we live in a world where governments have geopolitical desires on other people's resources, and then the media can portray another group as the other. And then if we're talking about that group is a threat to this group, having serious conversations in the workspace around cultural intelligence can be difficult. But I think it's incredibly important that we remember the human story. Humanity survives on storytelling, and humor is an incredibly powerful way of tackling misconceptions. And similarly, in response to the answer to your question you've just asked me, Rasheed, sport is hugely important. You know, we use an example when we're working with young people. I say to them, if all of the foreign footballers left the Premier League, how good would the Premier League be? And they're like, no, God, it'd be rubbish. I say, exactly. And I say, well, Google, Facebook, Adidas, all the major companies in the world now are deliberately focusing on diversity to improve their cultural awareness, because what they've understood is if you get the best talent from all around the world, your product gets that much better because we all have something to impart on the final product. But our work in sport, I'll say to them, if it's good enough for business and if it's good enough for sport, is it not good enough for society too? That we have all these cultures coming together. And our work with the Premier League was received in an incredibly warm and receptive way. We used to get, told that it was some of the best workshops the Premier League clubs had received. We talked about Islamophobia. We talked about extremism. We talked through the education and training. The young man who assaulted my uncle Zubair Rash before he passed away was formerly a football scholar. So he'd been through similar training. So I'm sharing a very personal and a tragic story with these young footballers that they can relate to. And I'm football mad. So I can really speak to the game and understand, I like all sports, but we try to keep it very, what's the word for it? Human interaction. I'm not there to preach to them. It's not simply 20 PowerPoint slides and you must not say this. I try to get them to understand. And honestly, the feedback from our workshops for a number of Premier League clubs, including Manchester City, has been incredible. It's, there's always competition in this space. Other organizations want to come in. Some clubs will work with you. Some clubs won't. But I'm very, very grateful that we've had the opportunity to deliver so much work around sport. And actually next month, there's an event in Egypt called Soccer X. It's an international event where all the various football clubs from organizations and the people who designed the latest football boot to the latest breathing testing equipment to the latest piece of grass, everyone comes to this conference. It's held 2 or 3 times a year. And next month, it's actually in Egypt for the first time in a Muslim African country. And I'm actually going to be on one of the panels talking about inclusion in sport. So it's incredibly important using sport. But it's quite similar to when you work with schools and businesses. If we just go in there to tick the box, diversity, inclusion, say a few words and leave, we're not going to get anywhere. There's always places to improve. There's always more we can do. And when we talk about inclusion and sport making a difference, I was in Qatar 3 times. I was in the stadium when Harry Kane smashed his penalty over the bar. If we're gonna say that the world needs to come together, and then as soon as the Qataris or the Saudis host a football competition or a boxing competition, and all we talk about is sports washing in inverted commas, then we are maligning whole countries and whole communities. So there's a lot more we can do through sport. We've made a good start. Other people are doing great work too, but there's a long, long way to go.
On the other hand, you are working with, for example, law enforcement, with police, right, in some of your trainings. How is this going? Because I can imagine that in some environments, police may not be very welcomed, and maybe through that, your organization is also viewed with some skepticism.
I don't want to make it sound like we're the greatest thing since sliced bread, but in the last 6 years, we have trained nearly 5,000 police officers.
Wow.
And specifically at North Yorkshire Police, which is one of the forces not too far from where I live. And almost every year for the last 5 years, we deliver workshops called Preventing Extremism, Promoting Unity, and Policing Extremism, Promoting Unity, And we have been voted or nominated as the best training provider almost every single year. Because again, when we go in there, we have an academic approach, but also a very grassroots approach. We show the films that we've made. The trainings are very, very interactive. We have a bit of lightheartedness, a bit of a jokes. And honestly, I could send you all of the feedback streams that we get
Please, yeah.
from the police. But we do address racism within the police. We do address stop and search and how it's, typically brown and black men who were suffering more. We talk about historic racism in the police, and we talk about modern racism in the police. After Black Lives Matter, for example, in one of the forces, there was police officers sharing what would be considered offensive racist images in private WhatsApp groups. There was actually an article in the Guardian newspaper which said racism in the police has moved from the canteen to WhatsApp. So it's still very, very prevalent, and we don't shy away when we're working with these police officers to say, it's all well and good, we're looking to tackle racism and extremism in the name of a religion. But at the end of the day, if you're working for a force and wearing a uniform which doesn't abide by the same values and levels of trust and understanding, and you actually fall into the same trap as some of the racists and people who are spreading that hate, we can't trust you to protect us. And ultimately, these are the people, if any of us was in a vicinity of a, God forbid, a racist attack or a terrorist attack, we would all run for our lives. It's the police officers who run towards the danger. It's the police officers that have to go and protect us. So if those people aren't going to be fully conscious of the threat that racism and hate and extremism can bring to a community, how are they going to protect us? And when we speak to police officers like that emotionally and honestly, I think that's where we get our buy-in, because we don't treat them like idiots. We don't beat around the bush, but we also say to them, if you're willing to protect us, we're willing to stand by you every single day. Because I know that if any one of us was in danger, in our homes, in our communities, in our workplace, we would rely on the police in any country to come and protect us. That's what they're there for. So it's gone really well. And I might be tempting fate, but they might not call me ever again. Inshallah they will. Because I often make a joke that the only people I don't like are Manchester United fans. And I think that always gets a good laugh. So, but it's good training, and we really enjoy what we do.
Hi, everyone. This is Doug from ReFOCUS. Many of you probably know that for the past 8 years, myself and my wife, Sonia, have been working here in Greece, supporting refugees and asylum seekers to develop media creation skills and have a chance at pursuing careers in media. And this has been a life passion for us. But the earliest stages of this on the island of Lesbos in 2016 motivated us to do something. We thought, how could we as individuals do something to change the situation, which was young people from lots of different places in the world who did not have access to education, who were not being provided any formal opportunities for skills training. And so we created ReFOCUS as a way to change that narrative and change that reality. And we are now here 8 years later with an international network of labs in Greece, in Poland, and in Germany. But that's not possible without really, really consistent support from individuals just like you. And so in this giving season, we're really hoping that you can find it in your bank accounts and find it in your hearts to support the expansion of our programming. The work that we do and the money that we receive, we do not receive money from governments. We receive the predominant amount of support from individuals just like yourself. And that money goes to cover the costs of our programming, the overhead of our labs, and the employment of our most seasoned media creators, those who went through our program and now are teachers. We're very different than the schools that you have back home, where you have endowments and you have an opportunity for families to support their next generation kids who are going to the same school they went to. We don't have that luxury. And so we have to do it as a community. And we are very thankful for all the support that we've received to date. And we hope that you can continue to support us into the future.
Amjid, I want to ask you a little bit more about the training, because first of all, I'm very intrigued how it looks like, the details, right? When you do the workshops and how are you actually talking to those young people. Are there some stories maybe that you can share with us? How does this thing go?
Oh no, it's a really important question, and the training can vary. So as I say, we are an education and training company, and we are using equality, safeguarding training, and especially current events to go into schools and colleges and talk about issues like racism, like Islamophobia, like anti-Semitism. You can imagine on the back of the attacks, the riots in the UK, there was a huge rise in demand to come and talk to young people. Then there's issues in football that we want to talk about. So when we go into a school or a college, for example, we can break it up into stand and deliver. So we can give a presentation and then take a Q&A. But one of the formats that we found really effective is a podcast format. So it's an assembly hall full of hundreds of children, and one of the teachers will interview me about my work and quite similar to this, and then we'll speak to the young people. And also we do sort of engagement training. So what we'll say to the young people is, for example, well, if I can make films, you can make films. If I can do this, you can do this. And they'll come and say, oh, your work is so important and it's really amazing and I wish I could do it. I said, of course you can. So there's that element of mentoring that we like to work with young people. And then when we're working with sort of teachers, because we do teacher training, we do police officers, we work with private sector businesses, then we might be talking about equality law. We might be also again talking about current events, and it can be a mix of interactive training and sort of information sharing, knowledge transfer. So the training can vary and adapt, but I find it incredibly empowering when for the two stories, I'll give you two short stories. So the first was of a young girl called Afra, and Afra is of Syrian Kurdish descent and had left Syria after 70% of her entire family were killed by ISIS. Over 70, all of her relatives included. And then we're visiting a college and we're doing some work around Black History Month. And she came to me and she said, I really, really enjoyed the presentation. I think what you're doing is really important. But could you come into a few more of our classes, English as a second language, it's a course, and maybe talk to my fellow students about sort of Islamophobia and racism a bit in more detail? And I said, well, what's the problem? And then she told me that she told me that what she'd gone through. And then she told me she was suffering racism in the UK because she was wearing the hijab. My heart's bleeding for this girl. And I said, well, would you not feel confident enough for you to address your peers and your classmates? She goes, oh, no, I'm not very good at public speaking. I said, well, a bit of training and a bit of practice and you'll get used to it. And she goes, but, I wouldn't know what to talk about. I said, well, I use films and sport to talk. Is there something that you're passionate about that it reminds you of home and gives you joy? And she goes, well, I really like poetry. I nearly fell off my seat. I thought, well, what a powerful way to express your story, to share with your peers. So we worked with Afra over a number of months, and then she eventually gave a presentation. Now, this was a few years ago. I think she's studying law now. She's thriving. But she really showed her friends and her peers the dangers of extremism and racism. And from a racist comment in class to the death of an individual, it's not a big jump. So you have to be really careful. So that was empowering. Another story I'll share is of a young man, a young white boy, who we worked with in what they call a PRU. So it's a pupil referral unit. This is kind of a non-mainstream school where children who have been, excluded from mainstream schooling a number of times are eventually sent to this center type school where it's not a standard curriculum. They're really just there between the hours of 8:30 and 3 o'clock. So that they're somewhere and they're not out in the street. And I'm talking about Islamophobia and extremism in a workshop, stand and deliver type thing. And when I tell the story of my uncle Zubair, he's laughing and giggling. So he's wearing a hoodie, quite like I am, and he puts his hoodie over his face and he's giggling. And then I cited the example of the attack in New Zealand and how the attacks on the Christchurch mosques were live streamed on Facebook and that content was shared hundreds of thousands, if not millions of times online. And he mouthed to his friend, I've seen that. And my next question was to the group of young people between the ages of sort of 12 and 16. How many of you have seen the attack from New Zealand? And nearly half the class put their hands up. And if any of you have ever seen any part of that footage, it's utterly horrific. And so when I clocked him whilst I was giving the presentation, laughing and mouthing away, at the end of the class, we pulled aside some of the staff and we said, okay, so this happened. And the teacher said, oh, well, he's from a troubled background and we know what he's like and some of his thinking. And I said, well, under the law, UK law, you're supposed to refer him to something called the prevent agenda with the police and get him some help. Oh, well, it's not really helped us at the moment. We're not really sure. I said, well, instead of deferring him, is there a way we can work with you and with him to tackle the prejudices and the views that he holds? This kid's ambition was, I want to go to prison like my older brother. That's what his life's ambition was. He's about 14 years old and all he wants to do is go to prison. My God. So we knew he had some challenges, and then Black History Month, Islamophobia Awareness Month, various events. We visited the school a few times. I did. We brought some of our colleagues and other partner organisations in. And slowly but surely, Sonia, we chipped away at this young boy. And in Black History Month, we had this event where we were sharing African food and saying to all the young people at the same school, we went on a tour of schools, and we went and we asked him to try some African food. And he was standing, oh no, I'm not going to try that. And we got him to try one little sweet. That's all we could get him to try was a sweet. And he goes, wow, that's quite nice that. Can I have some more? Yeah. We knew then, over this sweet and over these few minutes together, we could talk. And all I talked to him was about cars. He said to me, what car do you drive? I said, a BMW. And he goes, what kind of BMW? And I said, an M Sport. And he said, whoa. So he started talking about my car. Then he said, oh, you told us you're a Liverpool fan. They're effing shit. That's what he said. And I started to laugh. I said, well, come on. So through football and cars and food, I'm now engaging with this young boy. And just to cut a long story short, over the next few years, praise be to God, he has thrived. He's unrecognizable from the angry, skin-headed, moody little boy. Now he's thriving. I think he's on a petrochemical engineering apprenticeship somewhere. He's 18, 19, and I met the former principal of the school that we went to at a different site one day. And he told me, I said, oh, so what happened to, so-and-so? We haven't seen him for a couple of years. Because obviously you do your work and then the kid's got GCSEs and whatnot to do. He goes, oh, he's thriving. He's thriving. He's doing really, really well. And there's, so many of these examples, not just with children, but with adults too. Sometimes I'll hear the comment, you're one of the good ones. I think, well, thank you for that underhanded compliment. And it's not really a good thing to be saying. But at least you've met one of us now. There's another 1.8 billion good ones too. So, we're not all too bad. And that's the way we chip away. So the training can be academic. It can be very holistic. It can be grassroots. But it's also always, always passionate. It's always powerful. And that's what we base it on. If we haven't got something to share honestly from our heart, and that's why I encourage people, go back to the beginning. There's so many people who could make films, tell stories, write poetry, that you can share with other people to break down those misinformations and those narratives of hate. So many stories to be told. Let's tell them. And that's the way you bring people together.
Yeah, art is just amazing tool for change. But I always struggle, because I want to make movies, I write screenplays. I always struggle should I just make art for art because this is maybe what should be, or should I use it to change? But it's a pressure. But with everything is happening, sometimes you have I feel like I'm pushed. So I use it for change because if we are not using it, other people are using it to attack the minds of these young people and, radicalizing them. You mentioned you made a lot of movies, and I heard a lot about one of your movies, East to Northeast, but I could not find any trailer or something about it.
I saw the whole thing on YouTube,
right?
right?
On the website.
Really? It's on
the
YouTube?
website?
Ah, really? I didn't. Yeah, so maybe I didn't check very well. And yeah, so what is the role of art in activism, and how do you use it?
The role of art is to go back to the very essence of what it means to be human beings. Because the very, very first humans, as soon as they realized, if I pick up a piece of rock and strike it against another piece of rock and make some patterns, that looks pretty. And it gave someone a bit of joy. The role of art is to tell the human story, is to ask questions. And to Rasheed, you talk about using the film as a form of activism. First of all, use it for me, my personality, is something you're passionate. It's going to make you smile as the creator. You make it for whatever reason you want. But we use films to break down misinformation. Other people use paintings, even what's it called? Pottery. So, people are sat there with clay and making all sorts. There's so many things you can do, even if it's just around that medium. So if we're using films as part of a teaching toolkit, so once we've shown the film in our classrooms, Rash, what we do is we've wrapped around it a whole pedagogical toolkit where we can talk about. So Imran, when one of our films he's a boxing coach. The film's called Combinations, 7 minutes short. It's not very long at all. He was chosen to carry the Olympic torch in a relay in 2012. So when we set up Media Culture and went through the fellowship program with the University of Teesside, or Teesside University, I knew this local guy was doing this torch carrying. And he's a wonderful human being, apart from the fact he supports Manchester United. Apart from that, he's wonderful. But we knew he was carrying the Olympic torch. And in my mind, I thought, well, what a powerful symbol that is of a big, bearded Muslim man who's obviously been nominated by his fellow people in the local community to carry this symbolic, sporting, iconic moment of running through the town and carrying the Olympic torch as it makes its way to London in a relay. So we started with that. And then we said, okay, so what brought you into boxing? And slowly but surely, we've got this whole film about this boxing coach. And he talks about his experiences about being British, being Pakistani, suffering racism, achieving well in boxing. But then through that, we've managed to create a whole training toolkit that we can use in a classroom to talk about identity, belonging, culture, diversity, religion. We can tweak it to age groups. We can tweak it to speak to a particular point of view. Similar with East to Northeast. There was a film made a few years ago called East to East. I don't know if you remember, very, very funny film about the UK, about a family in Bradford. So we sort of played on the words with that. Another film that we made was called Head for Cover, because Muslim women in the UK who wear the hijab of any demographic are the most likely to be assaulted for their appearance. And obviously they wear the hijab. So East to Northeast, Head for Cover combinations, they're all used to sort of speak to my view of the world. How do I see the world? And my art, my filmmaking, or my friends' ideas, how do we bring them to fashion in a way that we can share our stories and our experiences with other people? And because we always had that idea of using it, you've all probably sat in some kind of diversity training in a particular work, and they've shown you a 10-minute video that's about 50 years old, and you've thought, oh my God, what am I watching? So we want to use the art to really express the contemporary discussions of the day. And that makes it exciting because we can consistently change it and make a new film, because what worked in 2012, what works for an English audience, like Combinations, it might not work for an American audience, but there's a hell of a lot of good American role models and Polish and Scandinavian people that we can use as role models, real human beings, to tackle the misinformation. And that if that boils down to using art as a form of expression, then sign me up, because it's fun, it's exciting, and everyone's got something to say. Everyone's got a skill set to bring to the dance, and let's get it on. That's really my take on it.
I have to go back to the sad events of last summer. So the riots that started last summer in the UK were an outcome of an attack of a teenage boy on dance classes. He murdered 3 girls, very young girls. And actually right now the trial starts when we were recording, and he admitted, he pleaded guilty to murdering those girls. This is something that for me is very interesting from your perspective. So of course this started a whole course of action, far-right activists and people who, I don't want to go to the causes, but masses of people started attacking refugees, refugee centers. It was something really unseen in the UK. In your opinion, I know it's really hard to analyze the whole process, but the big thing was that social media, immediately somebody announced on social media that the boy that stabbed the girls was coming from was an asylum seeker, came from Rwanda, which later on turned out not to be true. He was UK born person. His parents came from Rwanda, but he was born in UK. He went through the whole process of education in the UK. And on top of it, he was a very problematic boy, as I read later on. He was showing some inclination towards violence, but I also read that he was sentenced to the government counter-terrorism prevent program, not once. And I was wondering, in the context of what you're doing, like, how are those government programs also working or not working if after being several times at the training like this, this is what's happening?
No, it's such an important question because I think it's been revealed today that he was actually referred to the Prevent Agenda program 3 times. And, we as an organization have never ever taken a penny from government. We've actually been critical of the UK government's counter-extremism policy, Prevent, and said it's actually, in the very beginning, it's in its 4th or 5th iteration now, that it's actually doing the opposite of what it was supposed to do. But it's statutory duty, it's law in this country for every single public sector organization, be that a school, a council, the hospital staff, for all of the people who work there to go through the training that is called RAP training, workshops to raise awareness of Prevent, to promote British values, whatever they might be. And we've consistently said it's ineffective, it's actually divisive, it needs to be scrapped, we need to do better. But, those arguments, not only from ourselves, but, Amnesty International, United Nations, lots of people have said the UK government's program specifically is not fit for purpose. This young man, awful individual, who went and attacked those 3 young girls in Southport, which is a town just outside of Liverpool, and took the lives of BB, Elsie and Alice whilst they were at a Taylor Swift dance class. Utterly heartbreaking to see what happened. But minutes after that incident, we had prominent individuals in the UK, even the likes of Andrew Tate, posting that this guy was an immigrant, he was a Muslim, and he was none of the above. He was a violent extremist and someone with unimaginable hate and hateful views in his heart. Nobody can know why. So he's admitted guilt today in court at the beginning of his trial. And I think the impact of seeing 3 young girls being attacked like that, and then that painting of him being a foreigner, people literally were saying, "We told you so." This is what happens when you have immigrants and asylum seekers coming in. And then people were saying in the UK, well, we're going to hold a vigil. We're going to remember these girls. And the first vigil was hijacked by a far-right group in Southport, and the mosque was attacked. And then copycat incidents took place in towns and cities right across the UK, including in my hometown. And they targeted, as you say, mosques and asylum centres. But this was 2024. We've also had issues of similar riots, not as bad, in 2011, in 2001, in the 70s, in the 80s. So every 10, 15 years or so, we seem to have this kind of civil unrest in this country, instigated or ignited by a particular incident or a particular politician of the day. And we find ourselves having these conversations again and again. And, when we have senior political figures talking around the world about we're going to stop the immigrants, as if the immigrants are to blame for the collapse of your school, the fact that your mortgage is more expensive, the fact that fuel is more expensive. No, it's the governments that are in charge. Look at the people who are in charge of your countries and where the money is going before you look at the other. But when you bring awful incidents like what happened in Southport and other accusations of immigrants taking your jobs or Muslims are taking over or the Jews run the world in inverted commas, and people buy into these awful, awful mindsets, it doesn't take much to set off idiots in the street to cause violence. And I suppose what happened this summer wasn't a surprise to me. It won't surprise me if it happens again in 5 or 10 years. It really, really, some people are actually worrying that's going to happen again this summer, as in 2025, because we have the longer days. What might set it off? What might cause it? I don't know. But there's so much work to do. And just to go back to the question you asked, there's a lot more we can do in our community, but I really, really, really hope and pray that this government starts to listen rather than preach at what needs to be done, because it seems to be, if you agree with the government, yes, you're on our side, and if you dare to disagree with them, they might even label you an extremist, God forbid. It's a really difficult situation we find ourselves in, but, this is my country. I was born and raised in England. As cold and as grey it is, and the food that we have to endure. This is my home, this is my country, and I will stand for it and for the people of it. And I'll be honest, where I'm born and raised in Middlesbrough, it's a very immigrant town. Most of the white people here emigrated from Ireland. Middlesbrough and England is full of wonderful, wonderful people. And there's more of us than there is of them. But the ones who cause the violence and the hate get the attention and the headlines and the coverage, and we don't speak to our truth enough.
Just before the podcast, we were talking about how racist governments now are happy that they have these refugees and immigrants because they can blame them for everything. And we saw that in the 1st January this year when accident in New Orleans, the attack, and Donald Trump right away went on X and blamed immigrants. And then the news said that actually it was American, he was in the Marines, and he didn't retract that. He just kept blaming immigrants. And I wanted to ask you, because I hope it's not going to happen again in this summer, so that's why we have to discuss this stuff and we prevent them. Maybe we talk to the people who can prevent them. How did the system and the society in the UK fail to prevent the riots in 2024? I read something that the Justice Secretary, Kenneth Clarke, said it's from The Guardian. He blamed a broken penal system, and he said because it failed to rehabilitate a group of hardcore offenders. And he highlights the fact that close to 3/4 of those over 18 charged in the aftermath of the riots had prior convictions. So he's blaming the penal system. So what do you think should have been done?
What I think should have been done and should be doing now is, as much as I believe in having events that are diversity training, inclusion, we're preaching to the converted. We can sit here and have this discussion and talk about how much we detest racism and hate. But there are people out there who are suffering because of the socioeconomic situation of the world, they find their family and where they find themselves. Some of these people do have prior criminal convictions, but essentially we are letting those people down as well. Because every time something goes wrong, well, it's those people over there. Trust me, the working class did not cause racism. And that's why we've ignored these people too long. We haven't given these people their support. Well, Kenneth Clarke, I can agree with that, but I should also hope that you're going to call out the Tory government that have spread lies about immigrants, about Muslims, the consistent, divisive, bigoted comments made by politicians, the newspapers of this country, the Daily Mail, the Telegraph, the Sun, the way they portray Muslims and Islam. If someone dares to march on the street in support of the Palestinian, the Palestinian cause, pro-Palestine marches, as they're called, we have former Home Secretaries, the likes of Suella Braverman, calling them hate marches, labeling whole swathes of our communities as somehow extremists. If the politicians want to really address the underlying causes of where these riots come from, point the finger at your own Westminster, point the finger at your own media, and point the finger at your own unconscionable, irresponsible fellow politicians who are consistently dividing our communities based on the most subtle differences in religion, politics, or worldview, because, consistently humanity will move around. We live in a globalized age. The world has never been a smaller place. We're constantly going to step on each other's toes. But if we're going to allow politicians and the media to divide us, we're going to have riots on the street. If there's going to be people, if this guy who did the attack was a white man who did the attack, I'm pretty certain within a day or so, we would have had all over the far-right press in this country. Well, we found that he had been to a mental institute a number of times, and maybe if somebody had given him the support he needs, this might not have happened. But he wasn't. He was a black-skinned young man who they tried to label as a Muslim, which he wasn't, as an asylum seeker, which he wasn't. And consistently, and to this day, even if you go on social media on the day now where we're speaking, where it's Piers Morgan has said, so he wasn't an asylum seeker, he wasn't an immigrant, he wasn't a Muslim, but he had been referred to prevent 3 times what went wrong. So I'm kind of paraphrasing what Piers Morgan has said today on his Twitter. Underneath, there's people commenting, yes, he was definitely a Muslim, and they're hiding it. It's like, what are you on about? The conspiracy theories don't do enough. And I think if we really want to take the fight to make societies better and humanity better, not only is it up to us to tell our stories, but it's up to us to hold those in power to account. Really, really hold them to account. Because whether it's the left or the right, consistently, especially in the UK and across Europe, all I'm hearing is immigrants. And we have the most powerful, one of the most powerful, but the richest man in the world right now saying, using the acronym MEGA, Make Europe Great Again, and blaming asylum seekers and immigrants for all of the shortfalls of European society in the modern day. So, Rash, sorry, got me a bit riled up there.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
It really gets to me that innocent people in the working class communities, innocent people who are black or brown, people like us who are trying to make a difference, we're the problem? No. Hell no, we're not the problem. There's a hell of a lot more people who need to get in the queue well ahead of us, who should be taking responsibility for the fact that right across the world, our societies are becoming more fractured, more polarized, and more hateful. It really is that simple.
I'm sure that many young people would see you as a model for change and they want to be like you. So can you tell them and tell us your secrets to a successful social enterprise?
I'll be really quick because I know I speak too long.
No, go ahead. Go, don't worry.
When I begin my workshops, brother, I always say, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Whether I'm speaking to Muslims or not, because it gives me instantly the opportunity to explain to them what those beautiful words mean. That they mean, may the peace and blessings of God be upon all of you. And as a Muslim, I find it really hurtful that words like Assalamu alaikum, Allahu Akbar, they're so synonymized with acts of violence and hate that the actual meaning of the word, God is greater, Allahu Akbar, and Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you, are so lost in ignorance that I have to explain the words. And that's why I use them deliberately. At the beginning of everything that I do, I see my work as an act of what we call sadaqah jariyah. So I hope and I pray that God gives me a reward for doing this good work, please, Ya Rab. And honestly, I've got some experience in PR, and I got lucky that on the fellowship program that I went on there was a filmmaking organization called 1,000 Yard Films, 2 students. And I said, look, Muslim guy, big beard, carrying the Olympic torch, makes a good story. They said, oh, well, we'd like to make films about sport. And then we made combinations, and it's won its awards and it's done all its work. And all I would say to every person who's young listening, and especially, and I don't want to sound sort of, overly theological or overly about my own crowd, but I want my young brothers and sisters from the Muslim community, especially the sisters, to pick up a camera, to pick up the paintbrush, to stand in front of your peers, get on stage, go to the school, speak your truth. Don't hide who you are. Don't be afraid. And we're not all the same. Some Muslims have a beard, some don't. Some women wear the hijab, some don't. So when I hear the term the Muslim world, I think, well, the Muslim worlds, plural, there's lots of stories to tell. And just as our Jewish brothers and sisters for thousands of years have suffered at the hands of hateful ideologies and conspiracies, and the black community suffered and still suffers from the awful situation in America. Muslims are, really at the pinnacle end of hate now. So my message to anyone watching this or listening to this is, please, if I can do it, honestly, if I can do it, you don't know how silly I really am. Yeah. Anyone can do it. Let's get out there. Let's make films together. Let's speak to our young people. And also, be honest, if I find a problem in my own community that I think, particular belief, or I am encouraged, because in Islam, we have these, in the Quran, there's a passage of a verse that says, Lakum dinukum waliyadin. So you to your religion and me to mine, in the sense that we can agree to disagree. In the final sermon of the Prophet Mohammad, peace be upon him, he said, just to give you a small caption of his final sermon, he said, there's no difference between Arab and non-Arab, black or white, man or woman. They'll only be judged through what we call taqwa, God consciousness and piety. So pluralism and racism, when I see it in my own community as racism, and there is, some of that about in certain communities towards South Asians and by South Asians, I like to address that. But I'm 6'2" and 15 stone, so if I do get into trouble, I can stick up for myself. But there's so many stories to tell to our non-Muslim friends, to the world around us, and to each other. And please work with, the team at ReFOCUS and people like yourselves. And let's get out there and tell these stories, because eventually, as the saying goes, the truth will prevail. The truth will prevail. So, inshallah, I said short answer, but I just am not very good at them. Thank you for asking me that. I really wanted to get that out, so thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
Amjid, I think this is a perfect ending to this podcast, even though we could just chat for hours.
We need to have a podcast just talk about football, me and you, and go with it.
Thank you very much for being with us today. We're going to put some links to Media Cultured so that everybody can check your work. If somebody's interested also in the trainings. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. And thank you very much to everybody who joined us today. Please remember that Fractured in this form of interviews is online every 2 weeks, but we have a new format right now, Humanitarian Watch, which gives you some important news in 15 minutes, super short. This is every other week. So join us basically from now on every Thursday for those news and in-depth conversations. And thank you very much for all the people who supported us on Patreon. Thank you very much for Aputure. Thank you to Choose Love. And thank you very much to Allianz Foundation. We'll be back.
See you.
Hi guys, this is Sonia. And as many of you know, for the last 7, almost 8 years, ReFOCUS has been my passion project that I have been making happen together with my husband, Doug. And over those several years, we managed to graduate hundreds of refugees and asylum seekers with media skills certificates. And we are so proud that so many of them are pursuing their careers right now or go to higher education and are able to really make their dreams come true, contribute to the economies of the countries they decided to settle, and that they have lives, they deserve, they dreamt about, or they are on the path to do so. And yes, this is a donation appeal, because projects like this do not just happen. They need funds. And this is my personal appeal to you. If you can afford this, please consider donating to ReFOCUS. We're really doing really good job with the money we're getting. Our main goal in hiring policy is to hire from the community, from refugee community. So most of the staff are actually people who are refugees, asylum seekers, who have wonderful skills by now, either because they got them in their home countries or they got it with ReFOCUS. So if you feel like this mission aligns with your values, if you care about refugee causes and you can, please donate. If you cannot, please consider organizing a screening, talking to people, your friends, your family about this project, because it is really awesome and it just needs a little bit of support. Thank you.